Welcome, everyone. My name is Micah Howe. I'll be your speaker here today. So thank you all so much for taking time out of your busy weekends as parents and people in support to attend an event like this. It really means a lot. I want to say thank you to Kelsey and the other individuals that have been involved in putting this all together. It really means a lot. As I said, my name is Micah Howe. I am 31 and I suffer personally with severe OCD, depression, and hoarding disorder. And I have for quite a few years now. And so I'll tell you little bits and pieces of my story throughout today's presentation, but if you'd really like a detailed analysis of my story, I was recently featured in the last several weeks on the OCD Stories podcast. You can find that on Spotify, and I go into my story in a lot of detail there. But for the purpose of our time this afternoon, I really want to create as much value for you as parents and loved ones as I can. So I'll present for about the first 30 to 45 minutes or so, and then I'm going to open the last 30 to 45 minutes up to you all to ask questions. In my experience as a sufferer and an advocate, I find that parents have a lot of questions and a lot of times where they're looking to bounce ideas off of someone and they don't always get the chance to chat with a sufferer about things. So I want to give you all that opportunity. Just by way of introduction, I am not a therapist. I am not a doctor. Nothing I say in this session is intended to be an offer of medical advice or therapeutic services. I'm just a sufferer and an advocate speaking from experience to offer support. And this talk really grew out of a lot of conversations and experiences that I've had with parents during my treatment and during my time in advocacy over the last several years. As I look back in my late teenage years and through my 20s when I struggled, there are so many things I wish my parents understood that maybe I didn't know how to express at the time about what I was experiencing, what I was going through, and things that if they would have known that, it would have saved us so much stress and so much pain. And so I hope that you find benefit in some of the insights that I intend to offer here this afternoon. And so with that, I'm just going to get started in no particular order, just listing concepts and expounding on ideas. As I said, there will be an extensive opportunity for Q&A when this is completed. So please feel free to jot down your questions as we go, and I will leave ample time at the end for feedback.
Micah, I just wanted to say a quick hello. This is Leanne from the National Federation of Families, and I'm kind of monitoring, if you will, your room and just sticking around in case there's any questions or concerns, and also obviously to hear your presentation.
Thank you so much, Leanne. I really appreciate it.
Sure, welcome and thank you.
Yes.
Welcome to everyone in the room. As well, I'm seeing a few faces from other workshops. They're kind of following me or I'm following them.
That's wonderful. With that, I'll just dive right in if that's okay, Leanne.
Let's see, how many are you expecting, Micah? We have 31 right now and it's still a little bit early.
Oh, it is? I thought we were starting at 12:45. I apologize.
No, wait, hang on. Let me look at my, oh no, 1:45, you're right. Okay, and it is 1:49. Okay, and how many are you expecting, may I ask?
I don't know how many to expect. I'm just offering the presentation, and however many people are here, that's
okay.
Great.
Okay, I'm not sure the number either, but right now we have 31. So okay. Yeah, go on right ahead.
All right, wonderful. All right, so with that, like I said, I'm just going to dive right in. The first principle that I want to share is when it comes to parenting someone who is dealing with mental illness, I think it's so important to protect the sufferer in your life from your own stigmas and the stigmas of others. So again, protect the sufferer in your life from your own stigmas and the stigmas of others. I think this is so vital. We all grow up in a different context, and that context may involve a decent amount of knowledge about mental health issues, or it may involve very little. And we all tend to come with a certain amount of stigma. And I think it's so important to address those stigmas in your own life, those misconceptions, those unfair judgments that you may possess as a parent because of what you just don't understand about the particular mental health issues that your son or daughter might be dealing with. In my situation, I grew up in a conservative evangelical Christian environment. And while I'm still a Christian, there are many aspects of the culture that I grew up in where mental health was not understood very well, and it delayed my ability to not only get effective treatment, but find the sort of support that I was looking for. For example, early on, rather than taking me to clinicians, my parents put a lot of faith in the spiritual leaders in our life. And we were told that my mental health issues were largely a spiritual problem. And we were encouraged not to trust secular therapists. So I would encourage you as a parent, really make sure that you are doing your research and reaching out to nonprofit organizations to increase your education of what your son or daughter is dealing with. Speak with clinicians, read books by qualified therapists, and really make it an effort to be a student of what your son or daughter is dealing with. I think it is so much more challenging than people often realize at the outset to support someone with a mental illness. And it often takes a lot of time and a lot of effort learning to support and learning to understand what you can do to be helpful. So don't feel like if you've only been doing this for a few months and you're new to the diagnosis that your child has, don't feel like if you don't have the hang of it after a few months, there's something wrong with you. This is hard. This is difficult to unlearn some of the things about mental illness that you may have learned or not learned growing up. And in addition, it's important to understand that other people are going to have stigmas that may affect your family. You know, if you haven't found it out already, one of the things we learned in my situation real quickly is that when people find out that your son or daughter is dealing with mental illness, many of them love to give their opinion, whether it's asked for or not, whether it's qualified or not, whether it's based on good insight or not. You know, for me, when I started battling with depression, a lot of people told my parents that I was just lazy. And they just needed to be harder on me, and that would make things better. Instead of having a real understanding that I was suffering and clinical depression is a legitimate thing. And so be careful not only of your own lack of education on the topic and your own stigmas, but of those of family and friends that may bring hurtful and invalid opinions that can be more harmful than helpful. Secondly, I think it's important to understand that sufferers need you to be realistic about their struggles and their opportunities in the future without selling them short. And what I mean by that is often as an advocate, I get the chance to rub shoulders with different parents and different families. And there's sort of a continuum that parents seem to be on. And on the one hand, you have parents who they almost don't want to talk about their son or daughter's struggles. They almost don't want to listen to their son or daughter when they're talking about how hard it is to have mental illness, because they almost have this idea that I don't want them to make excuses. I don't want them to think that this mental health issue is a crutch, and I don't want it to hold them back. And the more that we talk about it and acknowledge it as being a difficult thing, maybe they're going to lean on this as an excuse not to challenge themselves more than they should. And so they almost don't give enough empathy to their son or daughter for how hard and scary these issues truly are. But then on the other hand, there's often parents who are on the other side of the spectrum, and they're so exhausted and they're so overwhelmed and they're so frustrated from how many times their child seems to be in a crisis in mental health that they lose hope for what their child can accomplish. And the goal becomes just keeping their son or daughter from having the next crisis, trying to prevent them from committing suicide. And that kind of becomes the extent of their hopes and dreams for their son or daughter. And what I think is really helpful is to do the best you can to strike a balance somewhere in the middle. It is important, I think, to recognize and understand that mental health issues are no joke, and they are incredibly hard to live with. And I speak from personal experience on that. And at the same time, many people I know with mental illness are capable of so much more than just managing their life, right? At the end of the day, underneath our suffering, those of us with mental illness, we are still people. We still have dreams. We still have goals. We still have ambitions. We still have hope for what our life can become. And it's so important that our parents are not only offering that empathetic support and recognizing that what we are dealing with is hard, but also recognizing that with the right supports and encouragement, we often can do much more than just try to manage these issues, just try to stay alive, just try to get through these problems. So it's important to strike a balance in terms of what your expectations are for your son or daughter as they struggle through these issues. Thirdly, I would encourage you to not compare your son or daughter to their peers who do not struggle, or to their former selves if there was a time that they didn't seem to deal with mental health issues. You know, when I talk to sufferers, one of the things that is not uncommon at all to hear people say is that it's so challenging to be someone who suffers with a mental health issue and have siblings who don't suffer, and feel like mom and dad are comparing you to those siblings who are doing so much better than you, especially if you're the oldest and your younger siblings don't struggle with mental health issues and you're falling behind them in certain ways. Maybe it's in school, or maybe it's in a variety of other ways. And it can be so painful to be compared to someone who's not facing the challenges that you're facing. And it can make you feel like you don't belong and like your parents don't support you the way that you hope they would. So try to understand that your child is on their own individual recovery journey, and comparing them to others that aren't facing what they're facing can oftentimes really take the wind out of their sails. But in my case, I was an only child, and my concern was not just being compared maybe to my friends who didn't struggle, but my parents compared me, and I compared me for the longest time to who I was before my OCD got severe. We looked at who I was in my early to late teen years, and we're just amazed that I just wasn't able to do some of those things at college age. Once mental illness set in and started to get severe, I had to go about things differently. And it took a really long time for us to acknowledge that, you know what, maybe Micah is not going to be like he used to be in every respect. Maybe we're going to have to accept that these mental health challenges are going to mean that we need to have a different approach, that we need to not have the same exact expectations that I used to have of myself, and learn to approach things in a different way. So I think that's so crucial when we think about the suffering that a family member is going through with mental illness. Next, I would encourage parents to understand that the sufferer in your family needs to know that you don't regret having them as a child, and they need to know that they have a purpose in your family. I think it's important to understand that while a person's age might vary their level of insight, the fact of the matter is, even if you are not going out of your way as a parent to demean a child who is suffering with mental health issues, or to tell them that it's so stressful to be their parent, we pick up on the fact that our mental health issues are challenging for us to live with, and they're also challenging for mom and dad to live with. You start to notice that, I see mom crying over frustration of my mental health issues more than a lot of my friends seem to indicate that their moms or dads cry over raising them. Or mom and dad are taking off work to pick me up and take me to therapy appointments, and I know my friends are not having their parents come to get them to do those sorts of things nearly as often. Or I hear mom and dad arguing after I go to bed about my care and about how difficult it is to raise me. And my friends don't tell me that they hear a lot of the same things. The list can go on of ways that a young person realizes the strain that their mental health issues put on the family. But I can say, as someone who has seen my mental health issues affect my parents, they didn't always have to come right out and say it for me to get the idea that my mental health symptoms were a lot for them. And the longer this goes on, right, the longer that you see that your mental health issues are hard on your parents, it's tempting as a sufferer not to wonder, this can't be what mom and dad thought they were signing up for when they decided to have me. This can't be what they looked forward to in parenting. And sometimes, especially if you have a natural tendency to get down on yourself, all you can see at some level is the way that you make the family's life harder. And it can be so important for parents to recognize that we not only need to remind sufferers that we love them, but we need to remind them of the specific things that we love about them. We need to be intentional in supporting them and including them in activities in the family that show them the value that they have to us. Because a lot of times, if we're not doing well with our mental health, maybe you're dealing with an adult child who is not able to keep a job, is living at home when everybody else is off at college like I was. It can be very difficult to not see yourself as a burden to mom and dad. And it is so important to be told explicitly, even though you struggle with these issues, even though your mental health struggles affect this family at times, we still love you for reason X, Y, and Z. We still wouldn't be the family unit we are without you, without your smile, without your goofy humor, without whatever it is that really resonates in your heart about what you love about your child. It's so important to verbalize those positive encouragements. Fifth, in light of that point, I would say be careful not to attack the person that you love when the symptoms of their mental health issues aggravate you. Be careful not to attack the person you love when the symptoms of their mental illness aggravate you. I know from suffering with my own issues that mental health issues lead to a lot of disagreements. They lead to a lot of tension. And it can be hard to see, but the truth is that behind that person who suffers with OCD, with depression, with bipolar disorder, with any number of mental health disorders, behind those symptoms of their mental illness that can make them act in ways that you don't understand and be confusing and frustrating, is oftentimes a person just like I was and some days still am. We are confused, we are scared, we are lost, we are living in a brain that is very difficult to deal with, dealing with scary thoughts that are very hard to manage. And we are often just doing the best we can to find our way in a world that in many cases largely does not understand what we're going through. So try to remember when you get frustrated with your child, when you get frustrated with that college student that has come home from college for the second time and can't seem to manage consistent work and is not living up to the expectations that you had for what you hoped they would do and be. Remember, they are a victim of a mental illness that is very, very difficult to understand how challenging it is to live with if you haven't lived with it yourself, and show compassion for them. And if you're listening to me say this and you're thinking, gosh, I can think back to that argument, or I can think back to that time when I lost my cool over symptoms of their mental illness that upset me, and I wish I could make it right. You'd be amazed at the power of an apology that recognizes the dichotomy between a person's symptoms of their mental illness and the person that they are deep down. Being willing to just say, I know that sometimes when your anxiety has been high or your depression has been particularly bad, I've said some things that I know hurt you. And mom or dad, I temporarily wasn't thinking that it was the symptoms of your mental illness that made me upset, and I accidentally took it out on you instead. And I'm sorry. And I know that you're not always as in control of these issues as you want to be. And I'll try to do better moving forward. It means the world from a sufferer's perspective to have someone in your life supporting you that recognizes that the things you do and the things you think are not always what you wish you were doing. And they're not always intended to upset or hurt someone else. And when we have a parent that understands that and empathizes with us, it's powerful. Next, I would suggest that you be careful trying to make sense out of all of your child's mental health issues. It's natural for us as humans to say, in order for me to best support you, I need to understand you. And we make an effort to understand the sufferer in our life. And I think that's good. I think that's helpful. It's so appreciated when someone I care about makes an effort to understand me. But at some point, the desire to understand absolutely every reason behind everything I say or do Sometimes it can become overwhelming because I don't always understand why I think certain thoughts or why I react in certain ways. And sometimes a loved one can press me for an answer that I just don't have. And I'm not trying to be evasive and I'm not trying to be unhelpful, but I don't always understand exactly why I reacted this way or why I reacted that way. And sometimes I think as caregivers, people tend to look at the sufferer in their life and use a logic that goes something like, if I was doing what they are doing, if I was saying what they were saying, I would be feeling this way. I would be thinking this way. But the problem is that is almost guaranteed to create a misunderstanding because my brain has a disorder that my mom and dad's brain does not have. So when they try to analyze my brain and my actions using a brain that is totally different than mine, it's almost guaranteed to create misunderstanding and conflict. And I think oftentimes for caregivers and parents, one of the most helpful things that you can do is read books, research, ask questions, talk to clinicians for insight, but always leave room for that aspect of recovery that requires a person supporting to be able to acknowledge that I will not get every aspect of what this person is dealing with, and I can't reserve my empathy until I understand absolutely everything. Some aspect of loving someone who's struggling with mental illness involves offering support and love and encouragement, even in the face of some unanswered questions. Next, I would encourage parents to understand that it is so important for the sufferer in your life to know that they will be okay when the day comes that you are no longer there to hold their hand or offer the level of support, whatever form that might be, that you are currently offering. Now, some of you with younger children, this may not feel overly pressing, but those of you with teenagers, college students, and the like, this becomes more and more important with time. It becomes more and more of a weighing concern as your son or daughter grows up and you grow closer to retirement age. In my situation right now, one of my deepest fears is also a fear that I know has kept my dad awake at night more than once, wondering if Micah's mental illness takes a turn, because I still suffer. I'm not on the other side of this thing. I've not been cured. I live through this. And there is that fear that, what if my mental illness takes a turn? What if the level of support that my dad and my parents have been able to offer me to this point, what if there comes a point where they just can't offer that help anymore? And obviously, eventually, there may come a point where they need support for their own health issues. And it can be so overwhelming and so daunting and so easy to just say, you know what, we're not going to think about that. That's just too scary. That's just too overwhelming. But one of the things that has been really helpful for me, as hard as it's been, is our family's willingness, even though my parents are divorced, which I'll get into in a little bit, my parents' willingness to have some of those difficult conversations and start talking about how can we position you best for the future. Sometimes that may mean talking to financial advisors. That may mean talking to estate planning attorneys, getting therapists involved, reaching out to family and friends, and starting to plan, look, if my son or daughter's mental illness continues to be as challenging as it has been, what sort of plan do we have in place that others in the family might be able to pick up the pieces where we might not be able to anymore, to help give our son or daughter the best chance to succeed that we possibly can in the decades that they will likely have to live with these issues, when we may not always be around to offer the level of assistance that we have for, the last number of years, or whatever the case might be. Additionally, I would encourage parents that we need to know that your love is unconditional and able to endure any relapses that we might have. One of the things that is so common as I talk to sufferers in their families is that a lot of people with mental illness don't always start going to therapy because they, the sufferer, wanted to go to therapy. A lot of times the family pushed for them to be in therapy, and they slowly came on later on and got on board and said, okay, I recognize my need. I want to be fully engaged. And when that happens, sometimes what can inadvertently take place is a belief in the sufferer that mom and dad can't love me unless I get better. And maybe mom and dad pushed me to therapy because they can't handle the version of me that isn't well. And all of a sudden, this pressure piles on to the recovery process, where I start to feel like I'm not only recovering because it's good for me, but I'm recovering because I don't know if family would accept me if I can't recover. And it's very important that you re-examine the dynamic and offer your child that support and that encouragement that we have you in therapy. We are encouraging you to get treatment because we love you and we want you to see the best life possible. But we are here for the long haul, even if this takes a left turn a time or two. Because the fact of the matter is, my recovery from mental illness, it's not been perfect. It's been a horribly bumpy road. It's had setbacks. I went to an intensive treatment facility at one point, spent several months there, was doing well for a while, and then relapsed and was right back in a dark place again. And it has been deeply important to feel that a support system to some extent is constant through all of that, because recovery is not fast for many people. It comes with setbacks. It comes with so many sleepless nights and tearful, frustrating conversations. And you just can't underestimate the value of offering your child this rock solid stability in the midst of that chaos, that you will be there for them, that you will stick by them even when things start to unravel. It's massively helpful from a sufferer's perspective. Next, number 9, there are 15 of these, by the way. It's not just this endless list of insights that goes on indefinitely. But number 9, it is important as a sufferer that you take care of yourself individually and your marriage or your relationship if you have a partner. It is important as sufferers that we know that you are taking care of yourself individually and or your marriage or relationship if you have a partner. I think one of the things that gives me such a passion for parents in all of my suffering is that you all, for the most part, are hurting badly. You feel alone. You feel guilty. There is shame. There is self-doubt. Am I a bad parent? Why is this happening? Whose fault is this? And many parents are just burying these feelings because the attitude is, this is about my kiddo. This is about helping my kid get better, whatever the case might be. And my pain is supposed to be secondary. My struggles are supposed to take a back seat while I make this all about helping my kid. And many parents, they need support. They need encouragement. Many of them need professional care. They ought to be seeing a therapist to help them process through some of the deep struggles involved in navigating through all of this. And yet it can be so hard to ask for help, and parents can even feel guilty asking for help. And I want parents to understand from a sufferer's perspective that we rely on you being well more than you might realize. There is a safety and a support and a security in your parents' marriage that provides stability. Knowing that even though this is struggling, the unit that your life is built upon is still intact, is still functioning. And it can be utterly terrifying to watch mom and dad's ability to cope go by the wayside along with your own. So if you are struggling in your marriage, please don't hesitate to seek support. I know there are heartbreaking issues going on in many couples' marriages, blaming one another. You know, if you would have been a better father, if you would have been a more present mother, maybe this wouldn't be happening. It can get nasty. And it's so important that you are doing what you need for your own mental and emotional health and seeking whatever level of care you need to be able to be the best support that you can be for your son or daughter. As I mentioned earlier, in the midst of my suffering, when my mental illness was about as difficult as it's ever been, my parents divorced in the middle of that. And the emotional disorientation that created was extremely challenging. And I just want you to know that, you know, if you are a dad, you know, your love for your child's mother is comforting to your children as they struggle. And if you are a mother, your love and respect for your children's father, there is a security in that. And when that unit begins to fracture and begins to break apart because the stress that the family is under is overwhelming, we notice it as sufferers, and it is a challenge. And so invest in your own mental and emotional well-being, and seek support groups, seek professional care when it's necessary, and don't feel bad about taking care of you. Number 10, I would say, be careful of invalidating the thoughts of the sufferer in your life because they have specific mental health disorders. Be careful of invalidating the thoughts and feelings of the sufferer in your life because they suffer with specific mental health disorders. I think one of the things that can easily happen is that when people are trying to support someone with mental health issues, they can easily confuse having mental health issues with having legitimate thinking disability. And what I mean by that is I have severe OCD. I have depression. I have hoarding disorder. But as you can tell by this presentation, it doesn't mean I'm incapable of having quality thoughts, meaningful insights, or valid emotions. And it can be so tempting for parents and caregivers sometimes to start seeing the sufferer in their life as only a sufferer. And every time they say something that the parent disagrees with, the immediate trump card is, well, of course you think that. You're bipolar. Well, of course, that's just your depression talking. Well, of course you feel that way. Your anxiety disorder makes you too sensitive. Whatever the case might be very careful of not listening to your son or daughter with an open mind just because you know that they have certain diagnoses. Don't assume that everything they say because they have this disorder. Understand that there is still a person under there. There is still a person with legitimate thoughts, feelings, and emotions. And be sure to listen to those emotions and not write off every thought because you know that they have a diagnosed mental health condition. Concept number 11. Please don't overlook the life-giving power of engaging in advocacy. Please don't ignore the life-giving power of engaging in advocacy. One of the things that I think so many families do, and our family did it for the longest time, there's so much shame around mental illness. And the temptation is, let's just solve this privately as a family. You know, we'll go to a therapist and we'll try to deal with this, but we're not really going to tell a lot of people that we're dealing with this. This is really just a private matter. We just want to get through and throw it under the rug and pretend like we never went through. And the concern with that is that when we do that, we miss an incredible opportunity to make our suffering meaningful for another person. Say, I just want to stop for a moment. Somebody's audio came back on. It's awfully distracting. If we
Yes, I was just going to say that. I can hear somebody's radio or something.
Yeah, if we could mute that, that would be really appreciated.
This custom dice block, DK chooses a 1. Sure, maybe this was because he was only interested in
yeah, Leanne, I know as host, I think you do have the ability to mute all of us. I'm not incredibly familiar with how that works, but I think that might be something that you can do.
And everybody, please try to click on their speaker that will mute. I'm going to see if everyone's trying to figure out who it is.
And I'm almost wondering if they like left their computer or something and it's just a radio. Oh, I think it went away there.
It did.
All right, perfect. Thank you so much. However that got fixed. Anyway, so when we keep this a private family matter and don't ever want to talk about it, don't want to seek support groups, we often miss an opportunity for advocacy. And obviously it's up to every sufferer and their families to decide how much they want to talk about their experience. And certainly, you know, it might not always be the right time. I know for me, I wasn't ready for advocacy for a while. But what I can say is that when you reach a point where you're ready to talk as a parent or as a sufferer for the benefit of others, there is something so invigorating about being able to look into someone else's eyes and see that they are suffering the same fears, the same concerns that your family did a while back. And something that you say is able to give them the encouragement to keep pressing forward. It is so inspiring for me as I have spent time talking with legislators at times and realizing that wherever you stand politically, the reality is we live in a society that isn't perfect, but there are people willing to listen to our struggles and try to make meaningful changes to policy so that other people don't have to suffer what we did. And being able to put value on your suffering like that and make it mean something in someone else's life is just an incredibly encouraging process, and something that I think so many families and sufferers, when the time is right, can benefit from. Insight number 12, I would encourage you to teach your children to have an attitude of resilience that is proactive. And what I mean by that is, as an advocate and a sufferer, I spend a lot of time talking about mental health issues, listening to other people's stories, rubbing shoulders with families. And the more people and families who are struggling with these issues that you encounter, the more you start to see patterns emerge. And you start to see the things that people who are reaching their potential and accomplishing some of their goals in spite of having mental health issues, you start to see some of the things that these people do that help them. And one of those things is you start to notice their attitude about suffering, their attitude about having setbacks in life, and how the family teaches the sufferer in the family unit to think about their struggles. I've had to grow in this area tremendously myself. For the longest time, I was so angry and so devastated and so overwhelmingly upset that I had caught the draw in life that I had to have these debilitating mental health issues. I mean, I graduated the valedictorian of my high school class. The first several years of my life were largely how I wanted them to go, with a few exceptions here and there. And all of a sudden, when my mental health issues set in most intensely in that transition from high school to college, my life was turned upside down. All of my expectations about what I was going to do and who I was going to be and what life was supposed to be were jumbled out of nowhere. I couldn't get through college and graduate. I struggled to keep jobs, and the list of difficulties went on. And it took a long time for me to realize that being mad, being angry, being upset, while it's a natural response and it has its place early on, eventually, if it becomes bitterness that I hang on to the rest of my life, mad that life isn't going the way I want, it doesn't help me. And I had to learn, as hard as it was, to acknowledge that my expectations about life, they weren't right. The reality is that we live in a world where people that do everything right to be healthy still get cancer. And people who would be the most wonderful parents in the world still sit together at the coffee table sobbing because of another pregnancy test that's negative. And the family they so desperately want to start just isn't happening the way they'd hoped. And I had to learn that for me, my hard thing, my bad thing that I had to face just because of the nature of what life is, was these mental health issues. And what I could do is do the best that I could to make choices every day to say, you know what, I need to be proactive to create the best life for myself possible that I can, in spite of these incredibly challenging circumstances. And if you can encourage your children to have a realistic view of what life is, to understand that setbacks and disappointment, they are common. And life is not out to get you because you get a mental illness or you get multiple mental illnesses. But it is probably true that mental illness, particularly if it's severe, is a lot harder setback to face than what many other people have to face. But the sooner that I can be willing to choose to be strong, to choose to be resilient, to choose to seek help and make choices that connect me with support and give me the best opportunity at recovery possible, the sooner I found in my life that I was able to start getting towards a life that was closer to what I had wanted for myself, even if I had to go about some of it differently. Insight number 13, I would encourage you to cultivate your child's gifts and passions when you can. Sometimes helping a son or daughter recover from mental illness is so overwhelming and so time consuming and so gut wrenching that it can be easy to forget to create memories with your child, helping them grow in the things that they love, in the things that bring them joy and solace in the midst of the struggles they're having. You know, when I started struggling severely with mental health issues, mental illness took so much from me. I just can't put it into words. You know, I worked so hard in high school to get ready for college and then just wasn't able to keep going with it. Worked so hard to try to fulfill some of my dreams, and it just was a massive stall. You know, watching my friends on social media go on with life and just being left behind in a sense, absolutely agonizing. But one of the things that mental illness didn't take from me is my love for fishing that I developed as a kid, my love for golf. And to this day, those things still give me solace at times to go and do and reminisce about times that were easier. And when I was at a mental hospital, you saw this in a lot of sufferers' lives. You could see people leaning at times on their love of music or their passion for art to find a healthy and meaningful distraction in the midst of their mental health suffering. And so I would encourage you, in the midst of the chaos, in the midst of the stress, in the midst of the busyness, take advantage of those times to help your son or daughter develop love for something like a sport or some activity that is a healthy thing they can be doing, using skills that they have to find peace and encouragement and that sort of thing. Insight number 14, and 14 and 15 are connected to each other. And I hope to wrap up here in the next several minutes and open this up to questions. But the 14th item that I would say is to understand that a successful recovery can have seasons of hellacious difficulty. A successful recovery can have seasons of hellacious difficulty. Look, as we move towards the question and answer portion of this talk, I would be remiss if I accidentally left the impression that any of the insights that I have presented didn't come at an incredibly high cost to me and my family. Recovery from mental illness is often extremely difficult, and it is often hard, not just for a day, not just for a week, but months and years at a time. And so if you are in a situation where you have been feeling like you have been running uphill in the recovery battle with your son or daughter for a while, please don't feel alone. Please don't feel that it necessarily means that you're doing something wrong. These issues are incredibly challenging. And when I talk about my own recovery, it really is worth mentioning that part of the reason that I have and am continuing to become a success story is because I've had a lot of time to grind away in good habits that my treatment team encouraged me in. You know, if you were to ask, Micah, how much have your mental health issues improved in the last 6 months? The answer is not much. If you were to compare where I am today, because I'm still struggling, I still battle on a daily basis. If you were to compare where I am today to where I was 6 months ago, there's not a shocking difference. But when you start to compare who I am today and the life I live today to where I was 5 years ago, to where I was when this all started around a decade ago, it is a night and day difference. How I feel about myself, what my opportunities are, how I've learned through professional intervention to cope with a mind that is sometimes very difficult to live in. And so understand that when it comes to recovery, there are incredible possibilities out there. But in my own life and in the lives of others that I have seen suffer, often the most hopeful changes, the most powerful changes take place over long periods of time. And you often go through seasons that seem very dark and that seem very lonely. And I hate it. I hate that for me, that was part of the journey. And I hate that for others, I know it was part of their journey. But I would encourage you, if you find yourself in one of those places, to know that there is hope, even if sometimes that hope comes along slowly. And, you know, I am here today presenting to you all, and it is such an honor. And I am so grateful to be able to be an encouragement to you as a sufferer. But years and years ago, I was stuck in my father's basement, hoarding items, unable to throw away garbage, setting mouse traps because my collecting of garbage had drawn the attention of rodents. I cannot tell you how far I've come in the last decade. And I do not say that to brag. I say that to encourage and to help you understand that I did not get better because this was a phase that I grew out of. I did not get better because, like a lot of people used to tell me, oh, Micah, you're a smart guy. You'll get this figured out given enough time. I did not figure it out. I did not crack the code. I did not work my way out of it by grinning and bearing it. I finally got connected to the right kinds of professional resources for what I specifically was dealing with. And by consistent involvement with the right resources and support and a lot of patient persistence, there was a lot of growth. And so I would just encourage you, the fact that you are even at this session shows me that you are trying to learn what you can to support your children. And I'm sure it means the world to them, even if they don't understand what you're doing, that you are learning, growing, researching. Continue to grow, continue to learn, continue to ask questions, continue to seek the insight of qualified professionals, and with patient persistence in these things, there truly is hope. And so I went for an hour, it looks like, instead of 45 minutes, but I still want to hold to my promise at the beginning that I would leave 30 minutes for Q&A. If you do not get to your question, or we do not get to you, or you'd like to continue some sort of dialogue with me, you can reach me at Mental Health MHE on Instagram. So Mental Health MHE on Instagram. And with that, I will open this up to questions.
First of all, thank you so much for sharing your journey and your story. And, you know, one of the things that really resonated with me, and I wanted to get you to repeat it if you could, because I want to make sure I got it right, was one of the insights: be careful not to attach the person you love. Was it because of their mental health system?
Yeah, so that looks like that would have been, I think you're referring to the fifth insight I listed, and what I have written here in my notes is, be careful not to attack the person you love when the symptoms of their mental illness aggravate you.
Okay, thank you so much.
Yeah, sure thing.
And I just wanted to say thank you very much for opening yourself up and putting yourself out there on this platform.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's very insightful. I'm a mother of a child that's bipolar. Actually, she's a young adult, and plus I am a parent support partner for a facility called Family Advocacy Community Training. So not only have I have that lived experience, but I'm also going into homes to provide that lived experience. So it's very helpful for the insight that you put out there. So thank you very much.
Sure, absolutely. But anyway, so yeah, so the insights, starting with number one, please protect the sufferer in your life from your own stigmas and the stigmas of others. Please protect the sufferer in your life from your own stigmas and the stigmas of others. Number two, be realistic about our futures without selling the sufferer in your life short. Be realistic about our futures without selling the sufferer in your life short. Number three, don't compare us to our peers or who we used to be before we had mental health issues. Number four, we need to know that you don't regret having us as children and that we have a purpose in the family. We need to know that you don't regret having us as children and that we have a purpose in the family. Number five, be careful not to attack the person you love when the symptoms of their mental illness aggravate you. Be careful not to attack the person you love when the symptoms of their mental illness aggravate you. Number six, be careful of trying to make sense of all the details of our mental health concerns. Number 6, be careful trying to make sense of all the details of our mental health concerns. Number 7, we need to know that we will be okay when the day comes that you can no longer hold our hand. We need to know that we will be okay when the day comes that you can no longer hold our hand. Number 8, we need to know that your love is unconditional and relapse proof. Number 8, we need to know that your love is unconditional and relapse proof. Number 9, we need you to take care of yourself individually and your marriage or partnership if you have one. We need you to take care of yourself individually and your marriage or partnership if you have one. Number 10, be careful of invalidating our thoughts and feelings because we have mental health diagnoses. Be careful of invalidating our thoughts and feelings because we have mental health diagnoses. Number 11, don't overlook the life-giving power of engaging in advocacy. Number 11, don't overlook the life-giving power of engaging in advocacy. Number 12, encourage your children to have an attitude that is proactive and resilient. Number 12, encourage your children to have an attitude that is proactive and resilient. Number 13, cultivate your child's gifts and passions where you can. Number 13, cultivate your child's gifts and passions where you can. Number 14, a successful recovery can have seasons of extreme difficulty. Number 14, a successful recovery can have seasons of extreme difficulty. Number 15, unbelievable progress is possible with the right support and resources. Unbelievable progress is possible with the right support and resources. So those are the insights I've got. Thank you so much, Rhiannon, for typing those out as I mentioned them in the chat there. For anyone that is looking to take those and take notes on those.
I appreciate you more than you can imagine. I'm raising my brother's children, and I was unaware of some of the issues. And what my question is I found that keeping a little bit of a note. My children are young. I've got 12, 16, and one that just turned 18. And so I've kept notes, but when we go to meetings and I have my little notes, it is not going well with the child. I am upsetting the child because their short-term memory doesn't always hang on. They're at the beginning, it'll pick up later, but I don't know how to present as a support team when it sounds like I'm just bringing a list of issues, or in my heart, I'm seeking help, but it is not looking or communicating that way. How could I better do that?
Okay, so just so I understand your question, what I gather from what you're saying is that you are, when there are issues in the family, at home, you take notes to yourself on something that happened, something you didn't understand, something that caused a conflict or something. And then when you go to a therapist's office with one of the children and use your list to try and remember what happened and make the therapy appointment as effective as possible, it's offensive to your son or daughter. Am I gauging? Okay.
Yes, I have 3 girls,
Okay.
and they have some oppositional kind of things. And I kind of talk in a sugarcoat way as a personality trait. And so I don't know if I've learned because of my children to use bigger words and that the adult in the room might understand versus trying to explain. So saying I believe there may be some FAS is easier than saying something negative concerning a parent. And so I am at a loss with my children I love dearly, and trying to locate and get them help through this only idea that I have limited options of ideas of how to get the help other than keeping a pattern. I'm a pattern person. And so I get the patterns and then I try to get help based on what I've observed. It's not working. Do you have another suggestion to me for how to not look like some kind of a tattletale inside the doctor's office?
I think, you know, the first thing I would say is, whatever clinician you are working with your children, I would really ask their input on this. What they think would be a helpful dynamic, and how they would recommend going about communicating with a child that is dealing with some of those issues, particularly because they may, you know, be able to talk about the child with certain things to get a better understanding of what's going on. I mean, that's just not something as a clinician I am really qualified, or I'm not a clinician, that's what I mean. So it's not really something I'm qualified to give any clinical insight on, but I can say from my perspective as a sufferer, I have definitely had situations with my own parents where when somebody is taking notes on the things you do, it can be hurtful. It can be like difficult. And so, like I said, I would just encourage you to, you know, express your frustration to your child's clinician, and ask them what they would recommend moving forward. But I certainly see your perspective that you are, you know, you're trying the best you can to, you know, make the therapy appointments as efficient as possible. But yeah, sometimes dealing with mental health issues and trying to be understood by a sufferer, you know, having your intentions taken for what they are, it can be really difficult. And I know that that was a struggle sometimes with my dad in my own situation. I felt like every time I had an issue, it was like dad was trying to remember so that when we went to the therapist's office, he could tattle on me. And that made like a really challenging dynamic. And so, yeah, I wish back then that my dad would have spent more time talking to the therapist separately and just saying, hey, here's the dynamic that we're dealing with. And, you know, I'm trying to make these therapy appointments efficient and effective. But the way I'm going about it is causing my children to actually not feel like I'm on their team in the support process. And what would you as a clinician recommend that I do, given their diagnosis, to make this mesh better and make this a more helpful, you know, experience? And like I said, I'm not a clinician, so I can't really weigh in on what you should do. But I would just say I can relate because it happened in our family a little bit. And I would just encourage you, yeah, to seek out your clinician and get some specific insight from their perspective on that.
May I ask you one more thing?
Yeah, sure.
I have noticed that there is two different models, the inpatient and the outpatient model. And an outpatient model certainly allows for more family input. But as I take my children to these appointments, these are based on their outpatient appointments, but they're inpatient models. And so they want to speak to the child who doesn't remember last week. And so the model is part of something that I've noticed as a little bit of an issue, is to try to take a person, drive them to an hour-long session, but it's all based on an inpatient model. Therefore, it is exclusive to family members from my perception. Do you see that, or have you experienced that, being that you've experienced both sides?
So, Crystal, you're highlighting something that is definitely challenging for a lot of parents. I don't work like the advocacy that I do. Like I said, the space that I'm more familiar with is usually like families that are trying to seek treatment for OCD or things like that, anxiety related issues. That's how I'm familiar as an advocate. That's what I've suffered with. But regardless, one of the things I'm trying to do, I mentioned I was starting my own company. And one of the things I'm trying to do is provide support and coaching for parents that have a son or daughter that is getting treatment for anxiety disorders. Obviously, it's a totally non-clinical sort of service. It's just a lived experience support, because a lot of parents do describe the difficulty that when we have a son or daughter in therapy, we are largely left out of the loop on what we can do to be helpful and what is going on. So I don't necessarily have a solution for you, but I can answer your question that you are not alone. There are a lot of parents out there that are looking for an extra level of encouragement, an extra level of support, someone to help them understand, like, how do I help my child when in many cases I am not always kept in the loop by the clinician that we are working with on what's going on, what I should be doing, how I can help, and that sort of thing.
Thank you.
Micah,
I appreciate you.
just to add for Crystal, what I've tried as a parent is to, when we get to the meeting, I'll talk about the good things that happened. Oh, you know what? He's been working on this, great job. Then I'll go into the things that need to be, that they need to work on. So at least you're starting the meeting with the positives for the child. And then I think the other thing I do is on the drive there, I always ask him, what do you think we need to talk to Mr. Rick about this week? So therefore, maybe sometimes it's reminding them of maybe some of the frustrations that we've experienced, or to listen to their side of it again, and say, how can Mr. Rick help us? So so sometimes it's getting their input, making them feel that we're not attacking them. Therefore, oh, well, didn't we discuss this in the car on the way here that you wanted? We thought we should bring up the disrespect, or we should, things like that. That's how I try to get the child involved, and then not so the child doesn't feel like he's being attacked.
I do want to let everyone know, I believe they told me in the organization of the conference that they will cut us off at 2:15, whether we are finished or not. So just in case we get cut off in the next minute and a half, thank you all so much. This has just been wonderful. And I am hopeful that it was a benefit to you. Thank you, Leanne, so much for all your help. I did see that Rhiannon had her hand up. I don't know if we'll be able to finish the question or the answer, but I didn't want to make you think I was ignoring you or anything.
You're fine. I just have a suggestion for all these moms and parents. Connect to your local resources in your state and national. In Oklahoma, where I'm from, we have a children's behavioral network. It's like what we do is we help people, like moms that are struggling to like take notes, approaching IEP meetings, how to handle certain behaviors. We help them and connect them to people that can teach them how to do this And one thing that we have is like the care notebook, and it's like there's one page, and it's like the positives of this week, and you write it up top, and like things we need to work on, and you write it on bottom. And like I use it for my mental health, and I'm 22, so like it is very helpful. So take up your resources that you can.
Yeah, so thank you. First off, need to apologize. I thought the mic was muted. It was not. My bad.
No problem.
I want to know what your thoughts are on the growing mental health identity movement. This is more common in the adult autism community, where there's this perception of viewing disability or mental health diagnosis as a core part of who a person is and their identity rather than a condition. I just want to know, is that something that's happening in the OCD community as well, or is that more of a separate thing?
Sorry, I'm just trying to understand your question. You're asking in the in my experience in the OCD community as a sufferer and as an advocate, are people starting to embrace an idea that like OCD is a core part of who they are as a person? Is that your question?
Yeah, that's about it.
Sure. You know, in the people that I know, again, I'm not a clinician of any kind, so I can't say what they are thinking on a professional level. But sufferers that I know and other people that I talk with, you know, that suffer or myself, I don't know if there is like a focused effort for people to start talking, at least that I'm hearing. I don't hear a lot of people talking that OCD is like a core part of who they are in any like massive movement or anything. But I would say that a lot of sufferers that I know, it can be a mixed bag. You know, I tend to think about OCD almost as like an imposter, and the person that I truly am is not OCD. But other sufferers will describe their OCD as, I really feel like this is a part of me that's hard to separate from who I am. So I think it's probably each individual, in my experience, seems to think about it a little differently.
Okay, thank you very much.
Yeah, sure. Well, if we don't have any more questions, you were right, Leanne, we went a little over and we are still here. So again, thank you all so much. I will try to respect the boundaries that they gave me here starting out and end here at my time, 2:18, your time, 3:18, or if you're on the East Coast, on the West Coast, it may be different. But anyway, like I said, you have my Instagram information if you'd like to reach out to me. Otherwise, I wish you all the best in what you are dealing with your children and their recovery. Thank you so much for being a part of this and for your questions and input. I hope it was helpful for everyone. And I wish you guys a great rest of your conference.